So good morning, everyone, and welcome to the North Carolina Climate Change Interagency Council meeting. I am Sushma Macemore. I serve as the Assistant Secretary for Environment at the Department of Environmental Quality. I'm actually excited today because this week actually marks the 4-year anniversary of the inaugural meeting of the council that was held on December 19th back in 2018. And just at a high level, this council, as you know, some of you are new, but was established under Governor Cooper's Executive Order 80 on October 29th of 2018. It was intended to create our priorities related to cabinet agencies, such that North Carolina's commitment to address climate change and transition to a clean energy economy progresses in a whole of government approach. Your secretaries and the designees as you are were established for each cabinet agency, and you serve on the council, and our department assists with the chairing of the council. But really, as the council members, there are many responsibilities that we each have. Two includes recommending new and updated goals and actions to meaningfully address climate change. And the other key responsibility that we have is to develop, implement, and evaluate programs and activities that support our statewide climate mitigation activities, as well as adaptation and resiliency practices. Congratulations. It's a major milestone, and we still have a lot of work ahead of us. But today, as you see on the agenda, we will hear about your agency's progress related to this order and other executive orders that have been issued since then, primarily based on the accomplishments of the last 4 years and many additional priorities that our stakeholders have identified. So I look forward to the conversation and the presentations. I'm going to pause for a moment here and see if any of our council members would like to make any introductory remarks. Okay. Hearing none, we will begin with our first agenda item. Sean, I'm assuming all the presentations are in your possession.
Yes, ma'am.
Great. All right. Well, let's get started with our first item. It will be presented by Ivan Erlob. It's titled Workforce Diversity Workgroup Report. Ivan, welcome to the council.
Sushma, Ivan is having some difficulty joining the meeting. We're working on that. I don't know if we want to move ahead to the second item while we get him logged in here.
Sure. Okay. So let's skip to the second item. This is from Andrea Webster. And Andrea is from the North Carolina Office of Recovery and Resiliency. She's going to be talking about climate strategy reports that each agency have been submitted to NCORE. Welcome in, Andrea, and thank you for providing us an update.
Thanks, Sushma. I'm happy to be here. So should I share my screen? Is that how?
I'm sharing the slides just now. Give me 1 second.
Great. Okay, well, I can get started here while Sean is getting us up and running. So my name's Andrea Webster. I am the Resilience Policy Advisor for the North Carolina Office of Recovery and Resiliency, which is in the Department of Public Safety. So we go by NCORE. You may have heard of us. We have a small 5-person resilience team that's working on preparing the state and its communities for the impacts of climate change in advance of when they hit. So I chair the Interagency Resilience Team, through which cabinet agencies and their resilience leads meet monthly and report out on climate adaptation work. That, what we call the IRT, facilitates interagency communication on resilience. Now, historically, that IRT has been the body that facilitates reporting on the 2020 Climate Risk Assessment and Resilience Plan, which calls for each cabinet agency to publish a resilience strategy report in March of every year. In addition to that March resilience strategy report, Executive Order 80 directs cabinet agencies to submit to DEQ a report discussing progress on Executive Order 80. So those are two separate reports. That Executive Order 80 report is due in October of every year, And given the overlap between those two reports, the governor's office has updated its ask this year. So you could advance the slide. Or can I do that? Yeah, okay. So the updated ask from the governor's office was to submit one report annually due in October every year that covers the 2020 climate risk assessment and resilience plan directives, as well as the directives in Executive Order 80 and Executive Order 246. As a reminder, Executive Order 246 is new this year. It came out in January, and it is focused on the transformation to a clean, equitable economy. So it incorporates some environmental justice and equity considerations into state agencies' climate change and resilience work, as well as making sure that we're funneling funding out to the most vulnerable populations who are hit first and hardest. Next slide, please. So because of all the overlapping directives in those three documents, we created a template to organize the way that each agency is reporting out on the three documents. And so those agencies are reporting the actions that they've completed, those that are underway or ongoing, and some actions that are planned, as well as the expected completion date of those actions. For the actions that are underway or ongoing, they will list, in the reports that have been published, they list what they plan to do in the next 12 months. So these reports are meant to cover, this year was a little bit, the schedule was a slightly different because we had agencies reporting in March and October with some duplication, but the intention is for these reports to report on the fiscal year going forward. And I will point out too, so section 3.0, address the public health impacts of climate change, that the directives in, I believe it's EO 246, are mostly focused on what DHHS is accomplishing. But there are other agencies that are working on this too and opted to report in that section as well. Next slide, please. So the guidance that NCORE and DEQ, so I think I failed to mention that NCORE and DEQ are now partnering to facilitate this reporting out to the public, out to this council, as well as to the governor's office. And so what we say is that this is meant to be a report that's not demonstrating the work itself, but it is an accountability measure. And so I think we understand that every agency's mission is different, and that the way that they interact with the directives of each document is different. And so we ask that each agency report on what they're accomplishing, where their mission overlaps. And so there are some sections, if you open up the report, where they will say, you know, this section does not apply to this agency. So, so keep an eye out for that. And that's the reason why some sections are blank, just because there are some agencies that their mission does not align with the directive. Next slide. So through the Interagency Resilience Team, we are at our monthly meetings talking about these reports. NCORE is meeting individually with each agency, with each cabinet agency, to talk about their questions and what they can include. As you probably understand, there are some agencies that really understand climate resilience, and others are still getting up to speed and figuring out how their mission interacts with this and how they can help the state adapt to climate change and reduce greenhouse gas emissions within the framework of their mission. We held office hours too to try to answer as many questions as we could, and the reports were finalized in October. Next slide, please. So, as I said before, the directive is for each cabinet level agency to submit a report annually. As a reminder, the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Affairs is not a cabinet level agency, but they still opt to submit these reports. And so we did receive one from them this year. 2022, I will say, is the first year the Department of Military and Veterans Affairs has been reporting. They submitted the March report on the resilience plan and then submitted again this fall for the most recent report. Last year, this council heard a presentation and update on these agency strategy reports You heard specifically from DHHS, from DOT, and from Department of Natural and Cultural Resources. And so today you'll learn a little bit more about DIT's efforts, as well as some of DPS's energy efforts from Paul Brace, who has joined me today. Next slide, please. All right, so as we look into the next year, we've been through this combined reporting once, and so we have some ideas on how we want to improve it and make it a little bit more accessible. I think we made a lot of strides this year with our reporting in terms of organization and clarity and of the content and of the content and the projects going on within each cabinet agency. So going forward, NCORE hopes to continue meeting with each agency one-on-one, as well as through the interagency resilience team. We hope to work with the cabinet agencies to discuss how to integrate the projects into their agency budgeting processes and their strategic planning. And finally, I'll just note that these reports can be found on the DEQ website by going to the climate change page and clicking on the Climate Risk Assessment and Resilience Plan. I believe it's also linked from the Climate Change Interagency Council page. Next slide, please. All right, so I'm going to just quickly go over what DIT has been up to. Unfortunately, they were not able to make it to today's meeting, so I'm going to cover this on their behalf. Next slide. So NCDIT is reducing the environmental impacts of its operations by improving energy efficiency in its Eastern Data Center, its Western Data Center, as well as in the Raleigh headquarters. They're using monitoring tools and augmenting manual processes that are already in place. They have reduced BTUs per square foot by 13% in the past couple of years. They are identifying ways to reduce energy by shutting down units that aren't necessary. They're raising room temperatures, and they are installing EV charging stations, hopefully in the next couple of years. Or they're in process of installing some EV charging stations. They're also purchasing electric vehicles, and when feasible, and purchasing hybrids when electric vehicles are not feasible. Next slide. So in terms of increasing statewide climate resilience, they have identified wind and flooding as their primary climate hazards. They recognize that some of their infrastructure is not designed for these threats. They have system architects and cyber engineers that are continually evaluating the physical and virtual environments of all state IT resources in hopes that they can mitigate the impacts on state assets. And they're working internally and externally to increase resilience of IT infrastructure and services. Next slide. So specifically, they are working to prevent data outages, both within state government and with local governments. They're meeting individually with local governments across the state to brainstorm ideas to minimize the impacts on IT infrastructure. The goal is to make sure that access to internet does not go down, and they also are working to expand broadband, which I'll talk about on the next slide. So they are also they've realized that they need an emergency water supply reservoir at their Eastern Data Center. So a loss of city water for 6 to 8 hours at that Eastern Data Center, for example, would cause a complete shutdown of the cooling system. And so they are working to install a 20,000 gallon or larger reservoir that could support that data center for several days to make sure that that doesn't go down. In terms of working with historically and underserved communities, the Chief Operating Officer, Tori Jessup, is the Environmental Justice Lead. Through the Division of Broadband and Digital Equity, they are working to expand broadband access and affordability, digital literacy and equity. And they're also partnering at the local level to increase enrollment in the federal Affordable Connectivity Program, which helps households afford their monthly energy and internet bills specifically. Next slide, please. So these are the two contacts you can reach out to if you have questions about their efforts. Tori Jessup and Hank Kaler. These are the representatives on the Interagency Resilience team, and they are the authors of this fall's report. Next slide. So thank you for your attention. At this point, I'm going to hand it over to Paul Brace, who is the energy manager through DPS, and he's going to talk about some initiatives going on in the Department of Public Safety and in the new Department of Adult Corrections. So Paul, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Next, thank you. Next slide, please. As mentioned, we are breaking this into two reports because most of you know that we are splitting in January 1st. So that split will be between Adult Corrections and Department of Public Safety. Next. In this particular slide, what we're doing is we're focusing on the areas that we can have the biggest impact and from Executive Order 80, and that primarily is greenhouse gas emissions and reducing energy and water intensity. In this particular case, because the Department of Public Safety is much smaller than DAC, it's only about 15% of the spend. Our biggest focus are two visions called LED in 23 and BMS, Building Management Systems, fixed in 26. In addition to that, we are focusing on low emission or zero emission vehicles and other areas which we'll talk about shortly. Next. In our LED in 23 campaign, we are proud of this program across the spectrum of DPS and DAC. As you can see, the major divisions within DPS, we've made significant progress. Just so you know, LED in 23 stands for fiscal year 23, so that's really June of 24. You can already see it in many of these areas, we have already retrofitted most of their sites or they are underway. If there is any weak area for the State Highway Patrol, there may be additional areas that we need to address, and that will have to happen by the new energy manager for that area. We also received over $1 million last year for R&R to retrofit all the remaining LED lighting for juvenile justice, for all lights, including utility-owned lighting. It's interesting to note that frequently when you convert from high pressure sodium or conventional technology, HID technology to LED, it actually costs you more per month. Next. In our building management systems, there's quite a few sites that are having BMS, Building Management System upfits, and we also received additional funds, R&R funds, next year to accomplish that. My guess is that as soon as we get project managers assigned to the remaining projects, probably 60% of the largest juvenile justice youth development center sites will have updated, standardized controls in place. Next. And this slide actually represents both departments where we can't focus on ZEVs because of the type of vehicle use, State Highway Patrol vehicles and other public safety vehicles. Right now, the vehicle mix is just not there, but we have gone to hybrids and we are using ZEVs where possible. Next. And the final area for the DPS is the natural and working lands. And this is dealing with natural heritage designations. This applies both to DPS as well as to DAC. Next. And what we are doing here, taking areas surrounding those facilities and preserving them. While it does not decrease carbon emissions per se, what it does is it prevents additional carbon emissions from occurring in the future. And these are two different sites. Moving forward, there's a couple of challenges in place. One, a project manager is needed for some of those R&R projects I just discussed. An energy manager is needed. The good news is that there are opt-out funds that we have been able to, I won't say create, but kind of carve out from our utility budget to hire someone to do that, at least on a part-time basis. And you'll hear me talk about this time and again, this performance-driven maintenance is that we truly need a workforce, a sufficient workforce, a large enough workforce, because it's difficult hiring people with our current salaries, but also one technically trained for these highly technical areas such as building management systems and even our boiler and chiller plants in the future. And finally, one of the opportunities to notice everything is about return on investment for us. True, this is about reducing carbon emissions, but there's nothing that prevents us from solving a lot of issues, whether it's deferred maintenance, reducing maintenance pressures, improving officer safety, improving human comfort. All of those things are accomplished when we successfully execute these projects, get a great return on investment, anywhere from 10% to 70%. And then on top of that, we get the carbon reductions. Next, please. So as far as adult correction is concerned, it is about 85% of the spend. You'll notice here a couple of different areas where we didn't have with public safety, and that's water management. And water management is because we have to remember that our prison sites are literally cities running 24/7, and they use a lot of water. So water management's an area, and performance contracting, where you're basically using utility funds, your savings, to pay for the projects, is becoming a major component of the direction that we're heading in the future. And you can see these other areas where we also have opportunities, which we'll discuss shortly. Next. We're really proud of that LED in 23 program. If you look at our exterior lighting, which is being led by David Mason, you can see where we were in 17-18. As Sushma pointed out, this program started at that time, and this order has truly helped us in that area. As you can see, we're already purchased almost all the fixtures. We're 14% left, and the installations are underway. Next. Our interior lighting, you can see here where we stand with the interior lighting. I want to point out that we are not focusing on Central Prison, which, by the way, is our largest utility spend by far, nor are we focusing on the 1,000 cells. We have 6 of those, our 6 largest facilities, and also our 6 largest energy users. And the reason for that is the performance contract. But even here, you can see we're making substantial progress with the program at our other facilities. Next. I also want to point out that the program that we use for interior lighting is a Small Business Energy Savers program in many cases, and it's great because it's a turnkey situation where Duke Energy comes in, offers a rebate from 30 to 60%, 30 to 60%. So imagine buying a car and someone else is paying for 60% of the car. Wow, isn't that great? And it's turnkey. This gives you an idea of what a typical facility looks like after we convert with LED. I will point out that the lights at Pender are a little bit too bright. This was one of our first projects. Our new standards are not as bright, but the quality of that lighting is still fantastic. Next. This gives you an example of the changes that occur when we change out our interior lighting. Notice that some of these are 70% return on investment. If this were the retirement world, y'all would ask me to be your retirement investment portfolio manager, because we get great return on investment for these projects. In most cases, we are replacing fixtures. 4-foot LED lamps are retrofits, but in most places we're replacing the fixtures because they're just so much more efficient than some of the retrofits. Next. Our BMS system, we briefly alluded to this. We have standards in place now. So we are getting one system. The graphics are being produced in one particular way so that the small amount of staff that we have can look at the systems and be able to understand them much better as we move forward in the future. In addition to what's happening on a contracted basis, there's a lot of internal retrofits going that are small, but they're allowing us to view those systems or see those systems from one common platform. And we also received R&R funds to continue those efforts to expand our standards across our 56 prison facilities. Next. The performance contract is another lever that we have to leverage funds to accomplish a lot. Next, and what it's going to do is allow us to not only save the energy and the water, but it's also, again, going to reduce maintenance pressures. It's going to decrease deferred maintenance. And we're also including the opportunity for solar and even electric vehicles in this because we want to take a comprehensive approach to it. Again, we're hitting all facets of facilities management when we do this. And by the way, we're reducing carbon emissions while we do it. Next. This just points out some of the things that I just talked about and how it's improving the reducing maintenance pressures as well as reducing deferred maintenance issues. And notice the impact on the reduction in energy and water intensity. This is important because we're getting ready to install $30 million of air conditioning in our unconditioned spaces. And what do you think that's going to do to our energy intensity? It's going to impact it dramatically in the wrong direction. Next. The water management systems, we do have a couple that are underway. Basically, inmates can creatively use water. They flood their cells. There's a lot of creative uses. These manage it to where maybe it's only 2 flushes per or 3 flushes per hour. And also, if there's a cell inspection and looking for contraband, they can. We can say there's going to be a contraband search. People start trying to flush things down the toilet to hide them. We can actually cut off the system and locate that. So that's another area of safety that we're improving upon. In addition, a major leak was repaired at Central Prison, again, further reducing our water usage. Next. We continue to try to take an aggressive approach with solar. The North Carolina Clean Energy is also involved with our performance contract. We are engaged with literally all of the electric co-ops at this point, trying to cast a very wide net to see where there might be opportunities. It's more difficult than it looks like because there's so many studies that have to occur, including from Duke Energy, before these can actually basically take off or be incorporated in our sites. But we're trying to take a broad approach to this. Next. And again, with our emission reductions, a lot of the funding we received, and we do have to thank the governor for supporting all of these funds and the DEQ for supporting these funds to get us these vehicles. Most of these are clean diesel because of the type of use that we have, but we're very proud that we are going to be getting a true electric vehicle, a utility truck. We have charging stations both under design and installed. The central engineering team is basically ramping up the installation design for various sites. So as funding becomes available, we can just start installing them at our other prison institutions. Next. And again, we have natural and working lands. Next. Again, just a view of some of the sites. And one of the sites that we have, it's not here, is at NCCIW, which is just right around the corner. It's just right next to major roads, and you'd never know, but it's a beautiful little area that we can help preserve through our efforts. Next. So what are the challenges and opportunities moving forward? Number one, we're going to continue to need funding for LED in 23. We received $3.5 million. We need about $7 million more to finish that. The BMS fix in 26, we're going to need funding on a continual basis as our systems become obsolete. One shout out again for maintenance is that we need a highly technical team for the maintenance of these facilities. I think many people assume that the type of maintenance we need is someone who can go out to a residential air conditioning system and install one. If any of you walk into mechanical rooms, they're very complex systems. Now, by the way, you're probably wondering in that photo to the right, what in the world I was trying to accomplish. You're probably even suggesting I should take a class in graphics, and I would agree with you. But here's what I was attempting to show. I'm attempting to show an old vehicle that's barely running and us putting brand new photovoltaics on top of it. Photovoltaics and alternative energy sources are a very important component of what we will need as we move down the road. But it's very, very important we understand we have to install it on new vehicles or refurbished vehicles. And many of our facilities, the infrastructure is in very poor shape. And again, it gets back to the need for the technical needs for staff who can handle those technical issues. And that's very lacking at this point. We talk about jobs for EVs. We talk about jobs for solar. We also really need to talk about those jobs which are in mechanical rooms and behind computers operating these systems. And finally, once again, to talk about the ROI. Everything we do just saves money. If you want to talk to me about your retirement income, please come talk to me. Maybe I'll suggest energy efficiency as that opportunity. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm not sure if we have time for questions or not, but that does conclude our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. And we do have Ivan on now for his presentation as well, Sushma.
Thank you, Sean. And thank you, Emily. And thank you, Paul. It's good to hear from both of you. And Paul, lots of good work. And it's really good to hear how decisions made a couple years ago, what that's translating into performance results. And I also appreciate your help in, disseminating and educating our other agencies with their decision making. So thank you for all that. We'll continue to have this dialogue in future meetings. Let me transition to the first agenda item, and that is a presentation from Ivan Erlab on the Workforce Diversity Work Group report. Ivan, welcome, and hope you can hear us. If you want to do a mic test, please do that.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes, loud and clear.
Oh, wonderful. All right. Well, my sincere apologies to everyone for technical difficulties today. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. Should I proceed?
Yep, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. Well, I'd like to start off by saying thank you to Secretary Beiser and the Climate Council for inviting me to present a summary of the Climate Change Workforce Diversity Report to everyone today. Thank you to my fellow work group members that volunteered to participate in this work group. It's my pleasure to share this information on behalf of the work group. Next slide, please. Following Governor Cooper's Executive Order 246, Secretary Beiser nominated the chair of our work group. The DEQ, Commerce, and the Governor's Office solicited participants in the work group, recruiting diverse perspectives that needed to be at the table when considering recommendations to address diversity in occupations related to climate change. The Climate Change Workforce Diversity Work Group was formed in late June 2022, so this year, and we met biweekly until the end of October. You can see more details in these slides, but I'm not going to read each slide to you. And there's certainly more information that will be available in the report when it's published online very soon. Sorry, I should have mentioned that up top. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, the work group members represent diverse backgrounds and areas of expertise. The recommendations in this report are intended to be strategies that all stakeholders committed to addressing climate change can work on together to implement. And there's a great diversity of stakeholders and expertise and institutions that can contribute and can effectively implement these recommendations. Saying that, this is not exhaustive. We were not able to include every voice that needs to be at the table to ensure a just transition to a clean energy economy. So at the end of this presentation, I'll highlight our approach to bringing more voices with lived experience to the table. Next, please. Governor Cooper's Executive Order 246 directed this work group to develop recommendations to diversify occupations and industries critical to climate change. So while climate change impacts all North Carolinians, it's well known now that negative impacts will be felt disproportionately by our communities of color, rural communities, and those living in low-income areas. To frame our recommendations through an equity lens, we focused on the populations outlined here in this slide. Just give a moment. Next slide, please. During one of our first meetings, we started off finding our focus. And so we discussed our top priorities that we wanted to address first. And we came to a consensus around 4 focal areas. Those are career awareness and education, employer engagement, policy recommendations, and community engagement and measurement. The report includes 11 recommendations and 30 strategies in these 4 key areas. And these 4 key areas and recommendations include, but are not limited to, careers related to clean energy, resilience, sustainability, and so on. These recommendations will require collaborative implementation. I'll probably say that a few more times in the course of this presentation. So now I'd like to review these 4 key areas of recommendations. Next slide, please. First, to increase career awareness and education, we must increase interest and knowledge of climate change, clean energy, and environmental justice. We know from the great experience of many folks who have already been doing work and who did the work that provided a lot of the case studies in the report that are highlighted, that young people have an increased interest in these subjects. But we must include their families and caregivers in our outreach strategies, not just try to engage only the students. We must identify career awareness and recruitment plans for our focal populations. And we must invest in strategies that connect our focal populations to training and education in these fields. A great example of this that is highlighted in the report is the Clean Energy Youth Apprenticeship Program in solar energy. This took place in Halifax County in 2021. And we know through new opportunities included in NCA&T's Steps for Growth award that more clean energy apprenticeship opportunities will become available soon and designed for our focal populations. And that timing, as many folks may be aware, is also wonderful because of the Inflation Reduction Act that was recently passed by Congress. And part of those incentives are focused on apprenticeships and paying prevailing wages. Next slide, please. So second focus area, the work group identified the 3 recommendations seen here in the slide and an additional 7 strategies to address employer engagement. We believe that tools like nccareers.org that help students and job seekers make informed decisions about their career pathways are critical to addressing information and knowledge gaps about occupations related to climate change. The Department of Commerce continues to ask the General Assembly for more funding for the nccareers.org platform. That is a collaboration between the community college system, the UNC system, DPI, Commerce, and others. Next slide, please. In the third key focus area, we identified 3 general policy recommendations and 10 strategies that are largely connected to various federal and state funding streams that can be better utilized to reach our goals. For example, we believe we need to provide funding for programs designed to support the educational and supportive service needs of students. The long leave commitment grants are an example of an effective program that provides access to post-secondary education. The Long Leaf Commitment Program provides a debt-free community college education for 2021 and 2022 high school graduates. We also need, we also need to market these programs specifically to our focal populations and identify any barriers in the application process. Next slide, please. And the fourth key focus area, the work group identified 2 recommendations and 6 strategies to improve community engagement and our ability to measure the effectiveness of these recommendations and other strategies toward increasing diversity and representation in the climate change fields. We know that we need to ensure individuals from the focal populations are included in the development of strategies to include them in our transition to clean energy and other mitigation efforts. That's why one of our next steps is to seek feedback from more community groups on this report. The Navigator is shared in the report as an example of a great tool designed to connect K through 12 teachers and educators with work-based learning activities. The Department of Commerce now shares the Navigator with new and existing industries and asks them to register on the platform. We can continue to leverage this effective tool by encouraging targeted employers to provide work-based learning opportunities to students through this platform. And that's a great example of yet another tool that's already in place where getting the many roles that I've been naming during this presentation and are identified in the report, working together on implementation, we could take very robust advantage of these tools, platforms, and resources. Next slide, please. So in closing, our next steps are to share this report with more stakeholders, include our focal populations, education and workforce partners, and employers. And then we will encourage all stakeholders to implement the recommendations outlined in the report and to update us on their progress. Thank you, and I look forward to any questions or conversation. And I do encourage folks to access the report when it's published online.
Thank you, Ivan. We'll pause to see if there are any questions. Okay. One suggestion I want to make, Ivan, is as you all have this released for public comments, it may be useful to disseminate it to this council. There are recruiting opportunities within a variety of our departments and their divisions that may lend well to the targeted careers and training opportunities, whether it's pre-apprenticeship or internships or apprenticeships. And the state government being a major employer, but also a recruiter for those entry-level positions, there may be some benefits to our agencies. So encourage you to integrate the council's input on this work.
Definitely, and I know that there was really incredible support in the production of this work from Department of Commerce team members as well as the governor's office, and that certainly made it possible for the working group members to really focus on their input to the report. And I know some of those folks are here today too, so we'll certainly follow up and take that action.
Great. Yeah, I think they can help implement that, the agencies. Great,
Wonderful.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you, Ivan, for your time and for your contributions in this work.
Thank you. I appreciate the very elevated attention it is receiving in North Carolina.
All right, we will transition to our third topic on the agenda. Sean, do we have that lined up? And do we have Zach Pierce or someone else from the office to present?
Sushma, Zach's here. Can you hear me okay?
Hey, Zach. Yeah, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Zach. So Zach Pierce is at the governor's office in the policy group. He will be presenting on EO 271, providing an overview. Zach, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good morning. As Sushma mentioned, my name is Zach Pierce. I serve as a senior advisor to Governor Cooper, focused on climate change and clean energy. And during today's council meeting, you've heard a bit about some of the implementation and progress updates on previous executive orders, EO 80, EO 246. And this morning, I'm here to provide an overview of a subsequent executive order in this space that was issued just earlier this year. We can go ahead and hop to the next slide. So we have limited time, and I'm going to try to be brief, but in the next few minutes, I'm just going to quickly provide an overview of some of the benefits that we see in working on to support the transition to zero emission trucks, which is the focus of this executive order. I'll talk a bit about exactly what the order does and what it means for our whole of government approach to supporting a transition to clean transportation. And while it's only been a couple months now, we'll provide some updates on the work that's already underway as a result of the order. Next slide. So from our perspective, there are several reasons to support the transition to zero emission vehicles, particularly in the medium and heavy duty sector. But before I get into those reasons, I wanted to just quickly review the graphic, which is on this slide, outlining exactly what types of vehicles we're talking about under this medium and heavy duty definition. And so as you can see, medium and heavy duty applies, generally speaking, to vehicles in the class 2B through 8 range, which is a class organization that's based on the weight of the vehicles. And this wide range encompasses basically all of the on-road vehicles that are larger than your typical passenger cars and trucks. So starting on the lighter side with trucks like the F-250, and then going all the way up through large semi-tractor trailers, and everything in between. Things like Amazon delivery trucks, school buses, refuse trucks. And so as you look at this diversity, I hope you can appreciate that these vehicles really do play a critical role in supporting the connectivity and safety of our communities, and they also help to drive the function of the state's economy. So why support the transition to zero emission trucks, to zero emission vehicles in the medium and heavy duty sector? One of the unique characteristics of North Carolina is that our state is already a national leader in the manufacturing and supply chain development for medium and heavy duty vehicles. And the reality is that this market is quickly moving towards zero emission vehicle technology. All you have to do is look at the commitments to zero emission vehicle technology that we're seeing from the manufacturers, the large fleet owners that are buying the vehicles, coupled with declining technology costs for batteries and other component parts, and the unprecedented levels of support that we're seeing in public funding, primarily through the federal government. It's pretty clear to see that based on these factors, that this transition is not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, and in the near term, it's a matter of where. Because we know this transition isn't going to happen at an even pace across the country and across the world. And so we want to do everything that we can to ensure that this global market transition leads to local economic development and job growth in North Carolina. In addition to supporting economic growth in the clean energy economy, we also want to make sure that North Carolina businesses have access to these newer, cleaner, and increasingly more affordable vehicles. And I'll talk about this a bit further in the next slide, but the order itself takes steps to help ensure that the state is ready to accommodate these vehicles, both through ensuring the availability of new vehicles on lots, but also in the market development through the build out of charging infrastructure and other needs. It's also imperative that we clean up this sector if we want to achieve our climate and environmental justice goals that are embedded in EO 246, EO 80, and now this new executive order. Medium and heavy duty vehicles today are the most frequently used and often the most polluting vehicles on the road. They only comprise a little over 3% of North Carolina's registered vehicles, but are responsible for over a third of the particulate matter, nearly a third of the NOx emissions, and a significant portion of other hazardous air pollutants. They're also the transportation sector's second largest source of greenhouse gas emissions after passenger cars. And as we all know, the transportation system is now the state's leading source of greenhouse gas emissions. And while climate change and the impacts of local pollution harm all of us, they disproportionately impact people of color, low-income communities, and other underserved communities that are most frequently living and working in and around these vehicles that are causing pollution today, whether that's near trucking corridors or logistic hubs or other areas across the state with the frequency of these vehicles. And so supporting the transition to clean vehicles in this sector is also a really important part of our environmental justice objectives, our public health objectives, and our climate change objectives. We can go to the next slide. So with that backdrop, on October 25th of this year, Governor Cooper signed Executive Order 271, which mobilizes a whole of government approach to supporting the transition to medium and heavy duty vehicles, zero emission vehicles. I'm not going to go through all of the sections in detail, but I did include them all on this slide to help demonstrate that we really are trying to utilize all of the tools in our state government toolbox to help ensure that this transition happens in an equitable, affordable, and reliable manner. So Section 1 of the order directs our Department of Environmental Quality to work with stakeholders to propose to the Environmental Management Commission an Advanced Clean Trucks program. And this is a program that would ensure that zero emission trucks and buses are available for purchase in the state. And this gets back to that consumer choice intent that I spoke to earlier. So an Advanced Clean Trucks program would require the manufacturers of medium and heavy duty vehicles to sell an increasing percentage of zero emission vehicles over time, while also providing flexibility through credits, trading, and other features as segments of the market grow at different speeds. We know you can't just require the manufacturers to sell these vehicles without also ensuring a healthy market and ensuring that there'll be a growing demand for the vehicles. So sections 2 and 3 of the order outline a strategy for the state to support our automakers, our fleet owners, and other partners grow the medium and heavy duty ZEV market through all sorts of strategies: investment in charging infrastructure, purchase incentives, workforce development, as we heard about in the previous presentation, demonstration projects, technical assistance, and other strategies that have been identified through the North Carolina Clean Transportation Plan, which I'll speak a bit to in a moment, and also supported by unprecedented federal funding. As I previously touched on, we know that the pollution from these vehicles disproportionately harms low-income communities, communities of color that are most often working and living near these distribution hubs and other places frequented by these vehicles. And so the order provides clear direction for our cabinet agencies to prioritize strategies that will really further environmental justice and health equity by improving health outcomes for communities impacted by air pollution and increasing affordable access to clean transportation options. And so that's where Section 4 really comes in, directing our Department of Health and Human Services to take steps to basically help further our collective understanding of where exactly are these emissions having a disproportionate impact, so that when we have resources to invest or we have programming that we're implementing, we can more effectively direct those things to the places where they're needed most. Section 5 gets back to a previous point I made. If we're going to have more of these vehicles on the road, we need to make sure that there's adequate charging infrastructure in place. And so our Department of Transportation is going to undertake an infrastructure needs assessment that looks at the charging needs and in some cases potentially the fueling needs for green hydrogen or other zero carbon sources of fuel to support the Advanced Clean Trucks program. Section 6 plugs into pardon the pun, but connects to an item of longstanding work of government leading by example and walking the talk when it comes to this work. And so really hones in on the importance of state government transitioning its fleet to zero emission vehicles, including in the medium and heavy duty space. And it was great to see Paul's example earlier of DPS moving forward with an electric box truck. That's the type of thing that we want to make sure that we're using the procurement platform of the state to transition to these vehicles, help mature the market, and reach our state government climate goals. And then finally, the order helps to expand a public-private partnership program at the Department of Environmental Quality, the Environmental Stewardship Initiative, to help support and highlight and celebrate companies that are really playing a leading role in transitioning their fleets to zero-emission vehicles. So that was a lot, and of course, I'm happy to connect with folks offline if they have more questions or interest in any of these specific directives, but that's a kind of high-level overview. You can go to the next slide. So as I mentioned, it's only been a couple months since the issuance of the executive order, but we have been hard at work because we know time is of the essence with this work. And so I'm just going to highlight a few of the implementation updates that I think are relevant for the audience today. Probably most importantly, just this week, the Department of Environmental Quality announced and released some of the timing and framing for the stakeholder engagement to develop the Advanced Clean Trucks program. And so DEQ will be convening stakeholders and hosting public information sessions starting next year through the spring to really hear from diverse voices across the state about what exactly should a North Carolina program look like? What are the specifics and priorities that we need to make sure that we're reflecting in our rural development as we work to put together a packet for consideration by the Air Quality Commission and the full Environmental Management Commission. And so I assume that this PowerPoint will be available online, and the link, the sub-bullet on this first point here is linked if you want to go online, learn more about that process, and get engaged. The other quick thing I wanted to note was that the order really speaks to investing applicable state and federal funds to making sure that this market transition is a success. And one of the exciting things is that we are in an unprecedented moment of available resources to invest. So I know we have a presentation after this one about the Volkswagen settlement funding, so I won't go into detail. I'll just say that's been a really important source of state funding to invest in cleaner vehicles in the medium and heavy duty sector and the associated charging infrastructure. We're also turning our attention towards the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. These are two programs that have countless dollars that either are explicitly supporting the transition in this sector or more broadly supporting clean energy deployment and clean energy technologies that we can use for the needs to support this transition. Things like the EPA Clean School Bus Program, $5 billion to support the transition of our electric school bus fleet to cleaner technologies. Or the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, this is $7.5 billion for charging infrastructure across the country. North Carolina has already received $109 million of that through formula, and there are additional funds that we can compete for. And then you move to the Inflation Reduction Act. This is a whole presentation in and of itself, but rest assured, there are a number of opportunities that we're looking at closely to make sure that North Carolina is drawing down as much resources as possible to help support and make progress towards our articulated climate, environmental justice, and clean energy economy goals, especially in this sector. I also mentioned that this order is not being implemented in a vacuum. And so one of the things that we want to do is make sure that we are leaning on the amazing stakeholder work that's taken place, led by our Department of Transportation over the last 8+ months to develop the state's first clean transportation plan. And so that effort has a targeted medium and heavy duty working group, and we're going to be leaning on the recommendations and strategies identified by that working group to really support the Advanced Clean Trucks program and this market transition writ large. The governor joined a multi-state memorandum of understanding back in 2020 that led to an action plan that we are utilizing to implement EO 271. And finally, in January, the state, pursuant to EO 246, will be publishing the final pathways analysis, which looks at some of the energy systems modeling and emissions modeling of what needs to happen across our economy, including in the transportation sector, to achieve the governor's statewide greenhouse gas targets for 2025, 2030, and 2050. And so I'll wrap it up there. But the point I'm hoping to make is that there's a lot of work underway. This executive order really is designed to augment and complement the executive orders that have already been issued, all of the implementation work that's underway. And we can't get this work done without the partnership of the folks on this line and folks who aren't able to be here today on the implementation work. So we really look forward to your partnership moving forward. Thank you so much. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Zach, for coming and providing this overview. Hopefully you'll be back again to give an update to the council. I wanted to let the council know that, as Zach mentioned, there are many opportunities, some historical, but some coming up in the coming months. Our Department of Transportation and DEQ's Volkswagen program that you're going to hear about next, as well as the State Energy Office, are at least 3 conduits through which you can learn more about as how Paul has integrated, your purchasing options for such electrification systems. So feel free to reach out to your partner designees or any of us, and we can connect you to the right people as you get involved in this space. Thank you, Zach. So let's go to Brian Phillips. Hi, Brian. Thank you and welcome back to tell us about Volkswagen. Phase 2 is a major process and accomplishment, so we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Sushma. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, loud and clear.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Brian Phillips, the Mobile Source Program Supervisor and the Lead Program Manager for the Volkswagen Settlement Program. Next slide, please. So North Carolina received an allocation of $92 million from the Volkswagen Settlement. Initially, DEQ planned 3 phases of the program. After phase 1, we decided to combine phases 2 and 3 into one final phase. Phase 2 had approximately $66 million available for funding. We did do some changes between phase 1 and 2. We learned some lessons from phase 1. We are in phase 2, we emphasized electrification projects. We added bonus points to applications that were electrification projects to increase their chance of getting funding. We also had a goal of funding at least 50% of the funds for our Clean School Bus program to electrified school buses. And we also expanded our Level 2 program to include a separate program for state agencies for charging infrastructure. Next slide, please. Additionally, we looked at our phase 1 applications and looked at which counties did not submit applications in phase 1 and devised a program to encourage these under-resourced resource counties to submit applications for funding, make them aware of the funding opportunities. Our team went to several locations across the state and did in-person meetings, explained the program, providing any assistance needed to submit applications to local governments and state agencies. We identified 37 counties across the state as historically under-resourced. These counties also received bonus points in their applications if they submitted an application. Next slide, please. So for our phase 2, we have completed awards for all of our vehicle replacement programs as of the middle of November. Our school bus program received the most funding allocation in phase 2. We allocated approximately $27 million to the program. We received requests of over $57 million in requests for school buses in phase 2. And then we actually awarded $30 million towards school buses in phase 2. We received extra money from our Clean Heavy Duty program because we did not receive enough applications to fully fund that program. So we applied those extra funds to electric school bus projects in phase 2 for the school bus program. Overall, we funded 161 school buses. Of those school buses, 80 were in historically under-resourced counties, and overall, we funded 43 electric school buses in this program. Next slide, please. For our transit and shuttle bus program, we had allocated $13.5 million to the program. We received over $35 million in requests, and we awarded the full amount, almost the full amount, $13.5 million toward school buses in this program. Transit buses in this program. Overall, we funded 49 transit buses and shuttle buses. 23 of those were historically under-resourced counties. Of that, 13 were all electric. And that includes the charging infrastructure. Next slide, please. For our Clean Heavy Duty program, we allocated $12.9 million. As I said earlier, we did not receive enough applications and requests to fully fund this program. We received a little bit over $11 million in requests for funding for this program, and we awarded every project to receive requests from. That totaled 45 vehicles. 29 of those were in historically under-resourced counties, and 4 of those were electric vehicles. Of note, of the 4 electric vehicles, 2 are for electric freight switchers in Hertford County, which is also a historically under-resourced county for Nucor Steel. That project alone will reduce NOx emissions by 93 lifetime tons, which is very encouraging for the program. Next slide, please. For our infrastructure programs, our DC Fast, we split into two separate programs. We had a priority corridors program expanded from our phase one program. We allocated $4.9 million for this program and received over $33.9 million in requests. It was a very highly sought out program. We awarded over $5.8 million for this program. And the additional funding came from our other DC Flash program where we also received less than we had allocated to that program. For this program, we are funding over 104 charging ports from Manio to Murphy, and that includes 43 ports in historically under-resourced counties. Next slide, please. Our second DC Fast program was an existing site program. It's something we learned from our phase one received input that we had a lot of old chargers out there that need to be replaced. So we set aside some funding for that program. We had allocated $1.6 million for this program. We received a little bit of $764,000 in requests. We awarded the total amount requested. That totals to 16 charging ports, and one of those ports will be in a historically under-resourced county. This program, again, is to replace existing chargers or add a new charger to existing sites to add capacity to existing sites. Next slide, please. For our level 2 program, again, we did set aside separate funding for state agencies. We received input for state agencies in phase one. Our phase one program was a rebate program, and it was a 6-month program to get projects completed. And we found out that that's just not enough time for state agencies to get projects to completion. So we set aside a separate funding pot of money for this program with the traditional contracts, where we allocated a little bit over $1 million to this program. We received requests on $2.5 million for this program, and we awarded the full amount that we had available. That totals to 103 charging ports across the state, and 22 of those ports would be in historic under-resourced counties. We received applications from state agencies, we received applications from state parks, community colleges for this program. Next slide, please. Our rebate programs are first come, first serve. We separated, in phase one, we had this one pot of money for public access, workplace, and multi-unit dwelling programs. In phase two, we separated those programs into 3 distinct programs. For our public access programs, we had a little bit over $1 million available. And in our workplace and our multi-unit dwelling programs, we had slightly less than $500,000 available for funding. So total we allocated $2 million over all 3 programs. This program, we still have funding available for all 3 programs. So far, we have awarded $1.3 million in requests. That allocates to 379 charging ports, and 42 of those are in historic under-resourced counties. Next slide, please. So kind of give you an idea of between phase one and phase two, this is a combination of all our total program awarded. So for clean heavy duty, we have funded 81 diesel vehicles, 4 electric, and 5 CNG vehicles. School buses, over the majority are diesel, 198. We funded 49 electric and 25 propane. And our shuttle bus program, we funded 1 biofuel vehicle, 2 CNG, 38 diesels, and 24 electric transit buses. Overall, we funded 427 vehicles in the vehicle replacement program, which equates to 372 lifetime short tons of NOx reduced. And overall, it's $75.5 million in funding to that program. Next slide, please. For our charging infrastructure programs, we have funded over 894 charging ports to date, which equates to about 51.1 annual tons of NOx reduced. And overall, we have so far have awarded $13.5 million in funding toward charging infrastructure programs. Again, we still have funding available for our level 2 rebate programs, so that number will increase as we finish through awarding projects for those 3 programs. And that's as of December 8th. Next slide, please. So if you'd like any additional information about Volkswagen Settlement, here's a link to our website. It has links about the available level 2 programs, also has a list of projects funded as of date, and also contact information for the program team. Next slide, please. This is our team members for each separate program. If you have specific questions about a program, you can contact one of them. Next slide, please. And this is my contact information. And are there any questions?
Thank you again, Brian.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Appreciate it. All right. I think that comes to the last of our formal presentations. Sean, do you want to lead the public engagement call outs for the folks that have signed up, or would you like me to do that?
Yes, I can call out these folks. We have 4 people who have signed up to speak during public comment today. When I call your name, please raise your hand and we will invite you to unmute yourself. If you are calling in through a phone line, to raise your hand, press *3, and to unmute, press *6. The first speaker we have signed up is Elizabeth Bowen from the Clean Tech Center. Elizabeth, can you raise your hand, please? I'm not seeing Elizabeth on the call. Next, we have Sonia Cato. Sonia, if you can raise your hand or press *3. I'm not sure if we have Sonia on either. Okay, next is Tiffany Minhorn. Tiffany, if you can raise your hand or press *3. Okay, last is Ann Stewart, and I believe Ann is on here. Go ahead, Ann.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, excellent, because I was afraid I couldn't get it to go. Thank you, and thank you so much for all these wonderful presentations. It's amazing what you all are doing. And I just wanted to make a comment that your plans for bringing clean industry and clean energy to North Carolina is outlined in Governor Cooper's EO 80 can't be successful without addressing the existing industries whose activities are directly counter to those goals. And the accelerating wood pellet industry is just such an industry example. I am speaking on behalf of the Southern Forest Conservation Coalition. The council really must provide sound recommendations to DEQ that are based on the known negative climate impacts, both the direct emissions from the wood pellet manufacturing process and the alarming loss of carbon sequestration when entire standing forests are logged to burn overseas. I am really concerned about the total impact, not just of the emissions of all the wood pellet operations, but the loss of our valuable carbon sink. And I have 3 requests for the council. Please calculate the entire impact throughout the supply chain of the wood pellet industry. Clear cutting, burning for manufacture, the shipping to the port and the shipping overseas, plus the burning of this inefficient fuel in the EU and the UK. Use this information to inform your decisions about whether the industry makes sense for our state, for U.S. climate goals, and the world's commitment to limit global warming to less than 2 degrees Celsius. Please work with scientists. Number 2, please work with scientists and academia to determine the value of the ecosystem services, its clean air, clean water, positive health impacts, biodiversity, climate adaptation, just to name a few of the standing forests, and use that data to investigate how landowners who now sell their forests to Enviva, for example, could instead be paid in perpetuity to keep their trees standing and providing these services for the long term. There are funds available in the Inflation Reduction Act for USDA's Family Forest Program, for example, but there are many other opportunities to use these kinds of ecosystem services payments. And then number 3, please develop serious alternatives for job creation in clean industries in communities impacted by the wood pellet industry, which are largely underserved communities of color. This is a health, economic, and environmental justice issue. And I'm so glad that so many of you addressed this particular aspect. Your council should consider all of these impacts, and I am gladly able to provide further details if you so choose. I would love to see North Carolina become a real true world leader in the way that you are developing your own program here in our state. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne.
Thank you. And that was everyone who has signed up to speak today.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Sean, for your assistance on the call. I'll open it up for my colleagues in other departments to see if they have any final thoughts, comments, suggestions, ideas. I'll pause. Okay. Well, please feel free to report back to your higher ups and staff that are supporting this effort. And we will follow up with the comment that was provided. And please stay tuned for the next year when we will continue on our work. And thank you. Have a happy holidays.